Have you ever asked yourself what someone would do if you suddenly disappeared from their life for just a few days? Not by choice, not by anger, just gone, wiped out by fate, lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Some people wait by your side. Others see an opportunity. My name is Mason Keller. I'm 44 years old. I spent over 2 decades managing construction crews, pouring concrete in the cold, watching buildings rise while my personal life quietly collapsed. I never expected anything glamorous. I just wanted to build something that would last, especially with Leah, my wife of 10 years. Then one afternoon, a steel beam slipped from a crane. The world went black. When I woke up in intensive care, bruised and broken, the first thing I saw wasn't a nurse. It wasn't a message from Leah asking if I was okay. It was a bank notification. Balance, 0, and a message, I need to do what's best for me. What came next wasn't fury. It was something deeper. A calm decision to take my life back. One document, one truth, one quiet step at a time. If stories like this stay with you, leave a comment, hit like and subscribe. This is one you won't want to walk away from. It happened on a Thursday just before lunch, the kind of day that feels ordinary until it isn't. I was overseeing a foundation pour at a mid-rise build on the east side of Denver. Nothing unusual. The crew was behind schedule again, and I was doing what foremen do best, pacing with a clipboard, checking formwork, and trying to keep 20 men from cutting corners. I'd done this job long enough to know when tension hung in the air. What I didn't know was that someone on the crane team had skipped a final cable inspection. The steel support beam, 800 pounds of forged certainty, snapped loose during a reposition. It didn't fall directly on me, just close enough. The shockwave from the impact threw me backward. My head struck the edge of a rebar cage. I remember the sound of someone yelling my name. Then nothing. They told me later I was unconscious for nearly 36 hours. Brain swelling, fractured ribs, internal bleeding. When I came to, I was in a private room, breathing through cracked lips, tethered to machines. A nurse was checking my vitals. She smiled like this was all routine, like, "I'd just taken a nap, you're lucky," she said. Another half second and we'd be telling this story in past tense. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. My first thought wasn't pain, it was disorientation. No flowers, no visitors, no Leah. When I finally got my phone, the screen lit up with only one new message from her. I need to do what's best for me. No punctuation, no warmth, and no explanation. I opened our joint banking app. My heart didn't race, it just sank. The account read 0. Every penny, gone. The emergency fund, the renovation savings, the investment account we'd been quietly feeding for a someday property. All of it vanished. The silence didn't scare me, the precision did. The nurse asked if someone would be picking me up the next day. I lied and said yes. But I knew there'd be no one. Not anymore. That night, I stared at the ceiling and felt something shift. Not rage, not grief. Something quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after a controlled demolition. The kind that tells you, everything you thought you built is already gone. Now it's time to see what's still standing. I closed my eyes and pictured the construction site. The dust, the noise, the split-second decisions we all made every day. And then I thought of Leah. The last 5 years of her eyes glazing over during dinner, the sudden girls' trips, the way she always turned her phone face down on the table. I'd chalked it up to stress, marriage fatigue, the normal erosion of intimacy. But now I saw it clearly. The beam hadn't fallen from the sky. It was loosened, slowly, by negligence. And maybe so was my life. The first time I met Leah, she was sketching in a worn-out notebook at an art fair in Boulder. She had a quiet intensity, the kind of person who watched everything but said very little unless it mattered. I was still a site supervisor then, younger, stronger, and living on takeout and overtime. She made her living selling minimalist prints, always just one good client away from breaking even. I thought she was different. authentic in a way the world rarely allowed anymore. We moved in together after 6 months, married within 2 years. I handled the bills, she handled the atmosphere, paintings on the wall, houseplants in places I didn't know needed plants. Our home wasn't extravagant, but it felt real. I worked long hours, came home covered in dust, and she always had something simmering on the stove. For a while, we felt like a team. But slowly, things changed. Not all at once. Not with screaming, matches, or slammed doors. Just a shift. She started referring to her art clients as energy collaborators. Then came the weekend retreats, the new friends I never met, the books about higher vibrational frequency stacked on our nightstand. At first, I made jokes. Then I stopped being part of those conversations altogether. I told myself it was normal. People evolve. She was finding herself. And I was just exhausted, too tired to ask more questions, too focused on holding everything together to notice the cracks forming under my feet. Looking back, I see it now. She didn't just grow distant. She started building a life that didn't require me. The smiles became forced. The intimacy faded into short hugs, then polite nods. The last birthday card she gave me was unsigned. I thought maybe she forgot. But maybe it was intentional. She stopped asking about work, about my crew, about the projects I poured my soul into. Everything I shared was met with a distant, or that's good. Her body was there, but her attention had relocated to another frequency entirely. Then came the passwords. Changed without notice. The joint credit card got declined at a gas station one night even though I'd paid the balance. She said it was a mistake. I wanted to believe her. I think part of me knew long before the fall. I just didn't want to admit it. Because admitting it meant accepting that the life I thought I was protecting had already slipped away. The truth is, I stayed because leaving felt like failure. And I'd built my whole identity around enduring. Showing up. Handling what needed to be handled. That's what men like me do. We absorb the discomfort, tuck it behind responsibility, and keep building. But now, lying in a hospital bed with every dollar gone and nothing to show for a decade of loyalty, I realized something. I hadn't been holding a marriage together. I'd been preserving the illusion of one. The next morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I opened my laptop, logged into the banking dashboard again, and started searching for every transaction connected to True Element Collective. The charges weren't large, but they were frequent. Weekly transfers, sometimes multiple in a day, each one labeled with vague terms like consultation, alignment fee, and energy access. It didn't take long to find the website. Deceit was a single-page site, glossy, minimalist, dripping in false calm. A pale color scheme with keywords floating in serif fonts. Awaken, transcend, heal through relationship vibration. There was no business address, no real contact info, just a generic form. But at the bottom, buried under legal disclaimers, was a company registry number. I searched it. It was real, and it was registered in both Leah's and someone else's name, Micah Strand. I'd never heard of him, but the name stuck. I looked him up. Micah had a trail, seminars in Sedona, canceled retreats in Santa Fe, a history of crowd-funded projects that fizzled just after launch. He called himself a relationship architect, whatever that meant. His public profiles were a curated mess of shirtless yoga poses, cryptic monologues, and reposts from followers who called him life-changing. And now he was in business, with my wife. Shane looked over my shoulder as I clicked through the images. That him? Looks like it. He grunted. Looks like someone who wears scarves in summer. I didn't laugh. Not because it wasn't funny, but because it was too real. I forwarded everything I'd found to an attorney Shane knew from his last divorce, Alexis Trent. She didn't work in big buildings or wear power suits. She worked out of a quiet, converted brick house and spoke like every word she used had been measured in court first. When I showed her the message from Leah, the bank records, the forged power of attorney paperwork I'd found in our shared folder, signed while I was unconscious, she didn't flinch. Power of attorney used during medical incapacitation is legal, she said, but using it to reallocate funds for personal ventures is fraud, especially if we can prove she knew your condition and acted in self-interest. She knew, I said. She texted me the same day she made the first transfer. Alexis nodded. Then we don't just have motive, we have timing, that's everything. Over the next week, Alexis helped me quietly file for a financial audit, submit a request to freeze joint accounts, and start building a timeline. Every action Leah took during my hospital stay, every dollar moved, every form signed under false. Context: we didn't confront her, we watched. Shane and I kept pulling threads. Leah hadn't just started this retreat company, she was promoting it. I found a private Facebook group called True Element Journeys. Leah was in it, tagged in photos with Micah, teaching emotional alchemy workshops. I stared at one picture for too long. Leah in a white tunic, barefoot, eyes closed beside Micah as people sat cross-legged in a circle around them. She looked peaceful, free. And I hated that part of me still missed her. But what I felt more than anything was clarity. This wasn't random. This wasn't emotional wandering. This was planned. She had found a man who told her she was more than a wife, more than a partner. She was someone destined for spiritual reinvention. And she used my labor, my broken body, my long hours, my paycheck, to fund it. She didn't just betray me, she turned me into a bank account she could spiritually outgrow, and now it was my turn to become something else. Not bitter, not broken, prepared. While Leah led cacao ceremonies and guided strangers through emotional purges, I spent my days compiling receipts. Not just literal ones, though there were plenty of those, but moments, timelines, patterns, every transaction, every instance of access to my personal accounts, every message that revealed knowledge of my condition while she moved money with precision. Alexis advised me to move carefully. This kind of fraud isn't loud. It's subtle. It hides behind spiritual language and the illusion of mutual agreement. But if we document intention, if we show how she used your medical incapacitation to gain access, then we build something strong. I didn't respond. I just kept forwarding files. Every night, Shane would come home, drop his keys on the table, and ask, "You ready to nail her yet?" And every night I answered the same. Almost. The most damning piece came from a credit union statement I hadn't checked in months, an account I kept for side jobs, remodeling contracts, personal emergency money. I'd only used it for cash deposits. But somehow Leah had linked it to a new PayPal account in her name. She transferred $4,800 just 3 days after my accident. She didn't even wait a week. The next day, Alexis filed an emergency injunction request to freeze that account. While the court processed it, she arranged for a forensic financial analyst, an older gentleman named Marvin, who had all the warmth of a brick wall, to walk through everything with me. "Look here," he said, pointing to a transfer from my personal savings to a business services provider. "That's a shell company, she's funneling money. Where does it go after that?" He pulled up a web of accounts, some in her name, some in Micah's. One under an LLC called Elemental, Kinship Ventures. They're moving it laterally, fast. Classic pattern of liquidation before a legal challenge. You're lucky we caught this early. Lucky. That word again. I nodded, but my mind was on something else. What if she had planned this months before the accident? What if my fall just accelerated a blueprint that was already unfolding? That's when Marvin clicked on a folder of flagged deposits. "She's been pulling from your insurance too." "What?" "Short-term disability. The form was submitted electronically. She listed herself as your emergency contact and used the hospital's incident report. But I never told her about the policy. Didn't have to. It's in your HR packet, paperwork she could have found in your filing cabinet." My stomach turned. This wasn't reactionary. This wasn't a woman pushed too far. This was a strategy, a slow, methodical exit plan built with a smile and yoga pants. That night, Shane poured 2 bourbons, and we sat in silence. The TV was on but muted, a football game we weren't watching. He looked over at me after a long sip. "You gonna let her get away with it?" "No," I said. What's the play? I turned the screen toward him, emails, transfer logs, timestamps, legal correspondence, and said, "We don't confront. We document. We wait." "Wait for what?" "For the day she thinks she's in control." He nodded, satisfied. Because the thing about building, whether it's a home, a life, or a legal case, is that when the foundation is solid, it doesn't matter how flashy the walls are. They crumble all the same when the pressure's right, and Leah was about to feel every pound of it. 3 weeks after I left the hospital, Leah still hadn't contacted me directly. Not a call, not even a text asking where I was. She must have assumed I was too weak, too broken, too blind to respond. Or maybe she thought I'd already accepted the loss and quietly vanished. That's how people like her operate. Behind the veil of positivity, they count on silence to mean surrender. But silence was never surrender. It was strategy. On a cloudy Thursday morning, Alexis called. "The injunction on the Elemental Kinship Ventures account has been granted. The judge agreed to freeze all known assets connected to your identity pending resolution." I exhaled. Not because we'd won, but because the clock had started ticking. We knew Leah would react fast. We just didn't expect how messy she'd get. The very next day, she sent an email from a brand new address. The subject line, "Urgent. Let's resolve this peacefully." I didn't reply. Instead, I sent the message to Alexis, who immediately flagged it as pre-litigation communication. "They're getting nervous," she said. "They feel the trap closing." That same afternoon, Shane's security camera caught a silver SUV circling his block twice. Micah was behind the wheel. We didn't confront him, just saved the footage. Added it to the growing archive. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at Shane's house. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a note from Leah. "I didn't want it to end like this. You pushed me away for years. I found someone who listens, who sees me. But I never meant to hurt you. Please don't drag this into court. We can talk. Just us." It was signed with her full name, almost like she was still trying to sound official, still pretending to hold the moral high ground. I read the letter once. Then again. There it was. A confession of motive. A subtle admission of fraud. Wrapped in the language of peace. And she handed it over herself. Alexis smiled when I showed it to her. "This," she said, "is gold. Emotional leverage disguised as reconciliation. Courts don't like that kind of manipulation, especially not when it comes after asset freezing." But it wasn't the letter that changed everything. It was what Marvin found next. Micah had created a fake invoice chain between their LLC and several dummy vendors. On paper, it looked like they were paying for marketing, retreat rentals, even emotional risk insurance. But the routing numbers traced back to Leah's personal account. In short, money laundering. I stared at the spreadsheet. How deep does this go? Marvin didn't blink. Far enough that if we wanted, this stops being a civil matter. I wasn't looking for jail time. I wasn't out for blood. What I wanted was something quieter, sharper. I wanted acknowledgement and control. So we made our next move. Alexis filed for a court-supervised mediation with financial discovery. It was public. It was aggressive. And it forced Leah to come to the table. She showed up to the courthouse wearing white linen as if she were headed to a spa. Micah didn't come. Her lawyer did, a young woman who looked more uncomfortable than confident. When she saw me across the table, Leah blinked. Just once. "You look different," she said quietly. "I am," I answered. And for the first time since it all began, I saw it, realization. She wasn't the one holding the cards anymore. I was. The mediation was supposed to be civil, quiet, efficient. But illusions don't die politely. Leah arrived at the courthouse with that same serene composure she always carried during her retreats, flowing dress, bare face, the scent of lavender oil trailing her like a performance. But when the financial documents were laid out, detailed, time-stamped, undeniable, her hands trembled. Her lawyer whispered frantically, flipping through folders, trying to mask the panic. Alexis remained calm. She was the kind of professional who didn't raise her voice because she never needed to. When Leah's attorney objected to the introduction of Marvin's report, Alexis simply responded, "Your client signed the accounts, your client filed the transfers, and your client attempted to conceal these transactions from a legally incapacitated spouse." The silence that followed was colder than the courtroom's marble floor. Leah tried to speak. "I didn't know," Alexis cut her off gently. "You didn't know your own signature? You didn't know your partner had a medical directive in place? Or were you hoping he wouldn't wake up in time to see the damage?" Leah's face drained of color. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, subtly pulling her back into her chair. Micah's name came up next. Alexis presented the fake invoices, the money trail, and finally the connection between Elemental Kinship Ventures and the dummy vendors. The judge overseeing the mediation glanced at the document, then at Leah. "This is very close to prosecutable fraud," he said quietly. "If Mr. Keller decides to escalate, your client may face consequences that go well beyond a civil division of property." For a moment, Leah said nothing. Then she cracked. "You think I planned this? I didn't want it to be this way. Mason left me long before I touched those accounts. He was always gone, always working. I was alone." Her voice echoed slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "I begged for connection," she continued, "but he buried himself in blueprints and schedules. Micah was the first person who ever asked me how I felt." Alexis didn't flinch. "So you responded to emotional neglect with financial exploitation?" "It wasn't like that. But it was. And she knew it." The judge leaned back in his chair. "This hearing is not for emotional catharsis. It's for determining the equitable distribution of shared assets. Mr. Keller has presented evidence of financial misconduct. Ms. Keller, unless you wish to contest that in full court, I suggest you speak with your counsel about a revised offer." Her lawyer pulled her into a whisper. Leah nodded slowly. By the end of the hour, they offered a settlement. Full transfer of the house deed to Mason, return of 75% of the funds she withdrew, and a signed agreement dissolving the LLC without pursuit of Mason's remaining investments. No alimony, no rights to his disability payments, no claim to his future earnings. Alexis looked at me. I nodded. Outside the courthouse, I didn't speak to Leah. She lingered by the curb, waiting, but I walked past her like she wasn't even there. She called out my name once, soft, unsure, but I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say. Micah disappeared 2 days later. The LLC site went dark. A few followers asked questions online, but no one ever got an answer. Just more vague messages about evolution and divine withdrawal. I didn't care. He wasn't my problem anymore. He was just a footnote in the story of how I almost lost everything, until I remembered who I was, and fought back with the one thing they never saw coming: evidence. 3 weeks after the mediation, the final documents were signed. The settlement was official. The house was mine, the accounts were closed, and the court order ensured Leah couldn't touch another cent. But there were no fireworks, no dramatic courtroom moment, no gotcha scene like in the movies. Just a quiet morning, a signature, and the soft thud of a legal file closing. That's the thing about real justice. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Leah moved out 2 days later. I came home to find the last of her crystals gone, her vision board stripped from the walls, and the fridge completely empty. She even took the kombucha jars. I stood in the center of the kitchen for a long time, not angry, not triumphant, just still. The house felt different, not cleaner, not better, just honest. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't hollow. It was healing. Shane dropped by that night with 2 beers and a grin. "You win," he said. "I survived," I corrected him. He nodded slowly. "Same thing sometimes." The next day, Alexis called. "There's something you should know." One of our paralegals ran Micah's name through a private registry. He's under investigation in Oregon, securities fraud. Apparently he's been promising returns on emotional real estate portfolios. Whatever the hell that means. I couldn't help but laugh. So he's finally found an audience that doesn't buy his charm. Looks that way. What? About Leah? Nothing yet. But if it surfaces she was complicit in the laundering, it won't end with this settlement. I thanked her and hung up. But I didn't need more punishment. I didn't need her to suffer. I just needed to be free. And I was. A week later, I started making changes. Painted the walls, ripped out the meditation corner, reclaimed the garage. I even adopted a dog. Rusty, a mutt from the shelter with one bad ear and a distrust of yoga. Mats, we were a good match. I didn't go back to the construction site. My body couldn't take it. But I found work as a safety compliance inspector. Steady hours, good benefits, and best of all, I came home every night. No scaffolding, no risk of steel beams falling from 30 feet up, no betrayal waiting in my bank app. Every now and then people ask if I'd ever consider dating again. I tell them the truth. Maybe someday. But for now I'm building something else. Not just a routine, not just a stable income. I'm building trust in myself, in the choices I made and the lessons I'll never forget. Leah and Micah thought they were taking advantage of a broken man. They thought quiet meant weak, that calm meant blind. But they underestimated the one thing people like them never understand. Some of us know how to build, slowly, carefully, with structure that lasts longer than the storm. They built illusions, built a case, and in the end, the illusion collapsed, while the truth stood tall. Quiet, unshakable, mine. Sometimes what saves you isn't rage. It's not revenge in the loud, dramatic sense. It's clarity. Quiet, deliberate clarity that comes when you've lost everything and realize that maybe, just maybe, what you lost was never truly yours to begin with. Mason didn't throw punches. He didn't make threats. He built his case like he once built foundations, layer by layer, until it could withstand anything. And in the end, what he reclaimed wasn't just his home or his savings. It was his voice, his strength, his ability to walk through the ashes of a betrayal and come out cleaner, not colder. There's something powerful in that kind of story. Not just because it ends with justice, but because it reminds us that silence, when used with purpose, can speak louder than any scream. Leave a comment if this hit you in a way you didn't expect. Something simple like, some people only show you who they are when they think you're not coming back. And if you want more true stories like this, stories about truth, betrayal, and the quiet power of fighting back, subscribe to the channel. You don't want to miss what's coming next.